Ignored at my daughter's wedding, my ex-wife's whispered, "You're just the wallet." Next morning, I woke up with 15 missed calls. I stood there, gripping a watch I'd saved for a year to give her, but the moment she walked down the aisle, it felt like my entire world shattered. What happens when the father gets forgotten at his own daughter's wedding? I didn't arrive to the church early because I was anxious or eager, but rather because I didn't want to ruin the one thing that should have been easy, being on time. I lingered in the parking lot longer than necessary, clutching the little black box containing the watch I had been saving for almost a year to give her. It was a small, pointless present in comparison to the $58,000 I had already spent on this wedding. This one, however, had a backstory. It was a personal one. On the back, it reads, "To Sophia, always your dad." I inhaled deeply before entering, allowing the refreshing blast of the air-conditioned church foyer to remind me that this day was already too formal for someone like me. I was stopped just past the entrance by the wedding planner, a 20-something lady with a clipboard and a fake grin. She tilted her head as if I were an elderly dog she wasn't sure could walk and said, "Hi, you're Lucas, right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm the father," a little too firmly. Her smile was smaller this time, like someone cutting deli meat. "You'll be sitting in the back near the center aisle, right? This way." I blinked. I thought I would be seated close to the front. With that same brittle civility, she shook her head. "Sophia's mom said you'd prefer it this way." I simply walked without saying anything. As we passed polished pews occupied by strangers, my footsteps were too loud on the tile floor. I assumed they were Doug's friends. Extended family on his side. A few individuals gave me confused, pitying looks, as if they had been told I was a problem that had been solved. Like I was scared the wood would splinter, I climbed up from the back, slid into my seat, and sat down gingerly. My chest felt hollow, as if I had swallowed something too large to pass, and my palms were already wet before the ceremony had even begun. Then my daughter Sophia, wearing a long veil, a white dress and a smile so big it nearly hurt to look at her, entered. Next to her, wearing a dapper navy suit and matching boutonniere, came her stepfather, Doug, who walked tall and proud. I sat there, forgotten, a man with a small black box, watching a memory being rebuilt in real time while the audience turned to watch them, phones up, flashbulbs popping. Not even the music was audible to me. A sort of white cacophony flooded my ears, the kind that only occurs when grief masquerades as rage. I wanted to laugh, yell, or toss the darn watch like a grenade across the aisle. Rather, I merely observed. My ex-wife, Karen, leaned over at that moment. Pearl earrings, a flawless blonde haircut, and that smile she had just before giving someone a flattering compliment. "You're just the checkbook, not the dad. Don't make this about you," she said, leaning in to whisper. She then leaned back as if she had just given me a 25-year receipt. The accuracy with which she delivered the death shot, no drama, no scene, was almost astounding. The man who stayed out of the way and signed the checks only heard a whisper in his ear. I clenched my fingers around the package. Now the watch inside felt heavier, as though it were soaking up all the embarrassment I was attempting to hide. "I do," Doug said proudly and clearly when the preacher asked, "Who gives this woman?" And I simply sat there, not breathing or making any noise. For what on earth was I meant to say? I paid for the goddamn flowers? Sophia was the only one who didn't turn to face me. She didn't smile at me as she went by or look for me in the crowd. The fact that she didn't even feel bad about it might have been the worst part. She appeared content. A chilly switch flicked inside of me somewhere beneath the heartache and humiliation. I no longer felt like a dad. I gave up on attempting to participate in a day that I was obviously never invited to in the first place. They left me out of the story, but they failed to remember that the author still has the final say. As I sat there grinning in my expensive suit, I watched my daughter leave me with her new father at her side. I did not give a clap. I refrained from crying. I took no action. But by no means was I finished. When you drive a child to school for an extended period of time, especially when the sun is just rising and the world hasn't quite recalled how loud it's meant to be yet, something occurs. Like an unseen thread woven through each shared silence and incomplete sentence, this calm, nuanced understanding develops between you. Those early morning drives, when neither of us really spoke much yet somehow managed to say everything that mattered, are what I remember most about Sophia when she was 8 years old. It was the year following Karen's departure. She didn't object, so I was granted sole custody. Before she took her luggage out, I believe she was nearly halfway through. I won't claim to have been a flawless father. I once sent my daughter to school wearing mismatched shoes because I believed the lights in her room were broken, burned more dinners than I cooked correctly, and neglected to sign a few permission slips. She had only been concealing her laundry, however. Rain, shine, or the kind of tiredness that leaves your bones feeling hollow, I still turned up every single day. I was present. From the age of 6 to 11, I recall taking Sophia to her soccer trials for 5 consecutive summers. She played for a total of just 3 seasons, which is funny. I suppose I was trying too hard even then, constantly showing up when no one asked me to, cheering loudly from the sidelines even when the score was already 10-0. I continued to believe that hard work would win loyalty, if not love. I didn't know that back then, but it turns out that's not how the arithmetic works. I believed that we were actually constructing something. The fragrance of peanut butter permeated the entire home. She enjoyed that for lunch, and I never really figured out how to make anything good other than that. Sometimes I would attempt to make it more interesting, like cutting the sandwich into stars or slipping in a sticky note with a stupid joke, but all she would do was roll her eyes and chuckle like a child who can't express how much they love something. Afterward, there were science assignments, Halloween costumes, and late evenings before math exams when we would sit at the kitchen table and pretend that I knew how to calculate fractions. I will always remember the day she brought her first boyfriend home. She came in holding hands with this gangly youngster wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big while I was in the garage fixing something that didn't need to be fixed just to keep busy. She said, "This is Kyle." And he appeared to want to burrow into the plasterboard. I didn't make a scene or say anything smart. She chuckled and simply nodded, saying, "You treat her right, or I'll make you cry." Kyle didn't. Those are still my words. At first, though, things altered gradually. A missed call here, a brief embrace there. Around that time, Karen got married again. Doug was a walking advertisement. He was pleasant, successful, and yet always tan. He was funny, owned a boat, and didn't smell like engine oil like I always did. I found it to be good at first. Instead of a distant mother and one workaholic screw-up, she might finally have 2 positive father models. However, it didn't take me long to notice that she spoke his name more than mine, that the holidays had become more complicated, and that I had been invited to lunch on Christmas Eve rather than Christmas morning. This summer was the major change. She became 16. She didn't look me in the eye and hardly touched her food over that entire week. Then one evening, she simply blurted it out in the driveway as I was about to drop her off at her part-time work at the bookstore. "Doug's just easier to talk to, Dad," she remarked. "I should be proud that she found someone else who got her," she continued, as if it were a praise. Hearing it from the girl whose night terrors I used to calm with lullabies I hardly remembered broke something I didn't realize could still break, even if maybe I should have. I remained silent in response. Simply nodded, shifted into drive, and took her to work. We didn't fully communicate. She put a tune I didn't recognize on the low setting of the radio. "Love you," she said as she got out of the car, but it seemed more like a habit than an emotion. Then things worsened. She seemed to be attempting to weaken our bond until it could safely fade away without incident, as evidenced by the unanswered calls and the shorter, more dispersed visits. And because I didn't want to push, I let it happen. I didn't want to be the controlling father who pushed love where it wasn't wanted. All I could think about, however, as I sat in my car in the parking lot outside her wedding reception, were the 17 years I had spent establishing a relationship that she seemed so keen to end. 17 years, 3 days a week, every other weekend, reduced to a single seat in the back and a whisper that told me I didn't count. I hadn't left yet though. I was still waiting in that lot with the little black package still in my lap, unopened. I'm not sure why, but I felt a tug that I hadn't experienced in years. Something sharp, angry, and old. Forgotten fathers, we remember everything, and love like that doesn't die easily. I'm not sure what my decision to stay says about me. Perhaps I was waiting for someone to realize that I was still here. Perhaps I was looking for a clue, any clue that this wasn't actually happening as it appeared. Perhaps all I wanted to do was watch how far they would go before someone blinked. As a result, I watched the ceremony with blurred vision, not totally confident that he wasn't already a ghost, much like a man seeing his own burial in a dream. I slid out with the other silent, forgotten guests and headed to the country club where the reception was being held after they exchanged vows, kissed for the cameras, and walked back down the aisle with her hand in Doug's and her grin gleaming. A palace served as the receiving area. Real columns, marble floors, and champagne glasses so tiny they felt like holding a breath are all examples of this, and it's not a metaphor either. The people were laughing as if nothing in the world had ever disappointed them, and they were dressed in clothes that cost more than I made in a month. I entered, gave no one a specific nod, and made my way directly to the bar. I nearly burst out laughing when the bartender asked whether I wanted an open tab. Saying, "It's my daughter's wedding." He didn't understand the joke, poured me a bourbon, and went on to the next man in line, who appeared to fit in better. I already paid for everything in this damn room. I located a table close to the corner, close enough to conceal myself but not quite in the shadows. I saw Sophia and Doug dance for their father-daughter waltz. That was so ironic that I almost dropped the glass out of my hand. I couldn't decide whether to flip the table, laugh, or cry. Bourbon was my choice. After 3 drinks, I began to feel brave, or perhaps simply numb. It never even came out of the box, I thought as I continued to brush my thumb over the engraved watch in my pocket. "Don't be late to your own wedding, kid," was the little joke I had planned to tell her during our dance, but it never worked out because the time never arrived. Then, as if I were an old college friend he hadn't seen in a long time, rather than the man whose shoes he was filling without authorization, Doug came up and grinned as if nothing had happened. He said, "Hey, Lucas," and held out a hand. I glanced at his hand but didn't shake it. Instead, I gave him a quick, firm nod, as if to keep my brain from blowing up. "Thanks again for helping make today happen. Means a lot to Sophia." "Sure," I replied, delighted to be able to finance the fantasy. He chuckled as if I were kidding. I wasn't. The DJ declared that the toast will start a few minutes later. Her college friend, a decently pleasant girl with little to say, was the maid of honor initially. Then came Doug's younger brother, the best man, who appeared to have rehearsed his speech in front of the mirror but still managed to fumble it. Hugs, cheek kisses, clinks of glasses, and laughter. The entire thing had the appearance of a fucking brochure. However, nobody called my name. The bride's father was not asked whether he had anything to say. I got to my feet at that point. I didn't wait for the song to end or ask for permission. I went directly over to the microphone, grabbed it as if it were mine, and cleared my throat. As if someone had put the emergency brake on the whole party, the conversation abruptly stopped. I noticed Sophia's mouth opening slightly and her eyes widening. Karen's expression froze. Doug did not move, but he leaned forward in his chair. Astute? I simply started talking without shouting or raising my voice. When Sophia was 5, she asked me why the sky was blue. I didn't know the answer, not exactly. I said something about air, water, and sunlight. She nodded like she understood, but then asked me if the sky would ever change its mind, if it could decide to be red or green or something completely different. People began to laugh politely and perplexedly, but that was her way of asking questions I didn't know how to respond to, such as why her mother stopped attending soccer matches, why I occasionally appeared exhausted all the time, or why Doug owned a yacht while I just owned a rusted automobile. Faces fell. The air tightened and changed. From skinned knees and tree forts to heartbreaks and high school dances, I witnessed this girl's development. The night she fractured her arm, I stood in the rain with a flat tire and wouldn't leave the emergency room until she was asleep. I taught her how to balance a checkbook, how to parallel park, and how to be proud of doing the difficult things, even when no one else is looking. I looked around the room. The majority of people had stopped eating. A few had set down their glasses. I never sought anything in return, and I never asked for applause. I assumed that love would suffice. I did, however, sit in the rear row today. No pictures with the bride, don't dance, no words, only a bill. Sophia's mouth quivered. Karen refused to look at me. Doug had not yet moved. I suppose I'll just be the bank that trusted her silence if I'm not the father. There was only the sound of forks scratching plates and someone clearing their throat close to the bar, no applause or cheers. Gently putting the microphone down again, I made my way back through the crowd as if it were a fog that was unable to separate. I didn't take the watch out of my pocket or say farewell. The silence was louder than any speech I could have prepared beforehand as I left the event and into the chilly night air. My phone sounded like a siren the following morning, 17 voice notes, all from Sophia. Some were upset, some were crying. Just a single sniffle of quiet. The final request. Please talk to me, Dad. Please. I didn't know. Please. I didn't hit play again, though, not quite yet. The phone was vibrating every few seconds as another voice message from Sophia arrived in my inbox with a gentle ping that somehow managed to sound more like remorse than a notice. It rested on the kitchen counter as if it had been waiting for this moment its entire existence. I sat down in the same wooden chair where I had taught her how to weave friendship bracelets when she was 10 years old and devastated because her best friend had stopped sitting with her at lunch. I poured myself a cup of stale coffee, the kind that had been in the pot for too long. In some way, the chair felt smaller now, as if the wood under me had been squashed by grief, or perhaps I was simply carrying more weight than usual, the type that doesn't show up in mirrors, the kind that doesn't go away with time or exercise. She began the first message by sobbing, not the type of polite sniffles you hear in movies, but actual, Unfiltered sobs and nasty gasps that came from the place deep inside her chest, where the body stores all the things she doesn't want to say. "Dad," she began. "Please don't ignore me. Please, I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't know they put you in the back." With my shoulders down and my arms crossed, I listened without touching the screen, trying not to react because there wasn't much more to say. What kind of apology could heal a hurt that had been neglected for years? A few minutes later, a second, more irate message arrived. "You ruined my wedding. Do you even realize that? Everyone was whispering about your little speech. I can't believe you would do that to me." As I looked at the floor, I pondered how easily individuals might go from sadness to guilt when they eventually face the truth of a broken mirror. I simply took another drink of bitter coffee and waited for the next one without saying anything into the air. The third message was brief and said, "You embarrassed Mom." Like her mother hadn't spent the greater part of 10 years telling her that I was simply a bearded walking bank account. There was no emotion or justification, just a straight strike to the chest. The fourth followed shortly after. "Doug said you told him you didn't want to be involved, that you were too busy with work to care about the planning, that you didn't even RSVP until the last minute. Why would you lie like that?" When she said the word lie, her voice broke, and I felt my fingers clench into a fist on the side of my thigh for the first time that morning. The RSVP had not escaped my notice. On the same day that I received it, I returned it. Hell, I had already seen the font choices and paid for the printing of the fucking invitations. However, it was now beginning to fit together like puzzle pieces that I was unaware were on the table. She had been fed stories by Doug, small, casual things that were likely spoken over breakfast or in the vehicle, never loud enough to set off alarms but just subtle enough to make her wonder who I was. I shrugged when she asked why I hadn't called after her college exams, and I smirked when I didn't attend a brunch to which I wasn't invited. Short tales. Minor omissions. Until I was outside my own daughter's life, peering in through stained glass, each of them put a brick between us. Her tone had changed once more by the seventh message. "I remember when I broke my wrist and you stayed up all night with me. I remember how you used to put my stuffed animals in a circle around me when I was sick so I wouldn't feel alone. I don't know why I stopped remembering those things. I let that one hit where it needed to by closing my eyes." Message 10 was more subdued and worn out. "Doug told me you sold your old truck because it didn't make sense to keep something so sentimental. I always wondered why you never drove it again. I thought you didn't care, but now I'm wondering who told me that." Against the chair's edge, my knuckles were white. The truck was more than simply a car. I never sold it since it was the final gift my father gave me before he died. Since it would no longer pass inspection, I had put it in a storage facility outside of town, but I couldn't bear to part with it. And because Doug had stated so, she now believed that I had thrown it away as if it were nothing. Her voice was low and her breathing was shallow, as if she didn't want anybody else to hear her in the 15th message. "I think he's been lying to me. I don't know what to think." I sat in that chair as if it were made of concrete without moving. The 17th followed. "Dad, Doug told me you didn't even want to be there. He told me you said it wasn't worth the time, that you didn't want to stand up in front of everyone because it would ruin the flow of the ceremony, and I believed him. I believed all of it. I don't know why, but I did. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." That one broke me, not because it was painful, though it was, but because I had allowed it to happen. I had taken a back seat, attempting to be the bigger guy, the more reserved man, the amiable one who didn't want to cause arguments or stir up trouble. I also allowed someone else to write my portion of the story by doing that. I was unaware that we were on the board, and Doug had been playing the long game. I got out of the chair, went to the drawer that contained the items I didn't want to look at, such as closed accounts, divorce documents, and old pictures with wrinkles from the heat, and took out the card from my attorney. Marcus Hayes was his name, and he had always told me, "If you ever change your mind, you have options." I did that morning. I called because I finally realized what they had attempted to take from me and I wasn't going to give them the last say, not because I wanted retribution. I left the folder in the top drawer of the filing cabinet, under a pile of old tax returns and a washing machine manual that I hadn't used in more than 10 years. Slowly, as if it were something brittle or cursed, I took it out and placed it open on the kitchen table beside a half-full mug of reheated coffee that had once again become lukewarm. Everything was there, notarized, time-stamped, and itemized. Even the down payment receipts for the bespoke lighting and the $1,000 cake that nobody remembered to serve, as well as the catering contract, venue rental agreement, and floral design invoice. Not Doug's, not Karen's, not Sophia's, but mine, my name on every line, my signature in every box, my bank account on every transaction. As the venue planner went over package possibilities and added zero after zero to the price, I recalled sitting in her office and nodding along. I pretended not to flinch because I knew Sophia deserved the best. I continued to think, perhaps naively, that providing it would be more important than the politics of motherhood after a divorce. I recalled the hefty, glossy folder she had given me, which had the words, "Primary Client," printed in block letters on the front. That's when I laughed. "Guess that makes me the boss," I quipped. The woman also chuckled. Neither of us said out loud that I would never be treated that way by anyone. Nevertheless, I sat in my chair at that old kitchen table and read every sentence as if it were scripture weeks after the wedding and days after those 17 phone messages played like a slideshow of remorse. But then I noticed it, underlined in yellow from a meeting months prior. All footage and creative assets are the property of the primary payer, unless otherwise stated in a separate media release. The rest of the text was conventional fare, including liability protections, damage waivers, and non-refundable deposits. Like a freight train in reverse, it struck me. I owned the footage, the pictures, the uncut takes, the soundtrack, and the edit, but not the wedding, the day, or the instant she said I do and forgot I was there. There was nothing I wanted to cancel. I didn't want to be the type of man who burns the ground to feel good about himself because the wedding has already taken place. However, I desired something genuine, something enduring, something that, for once, featured me in the picture, not merely as a name on a receipt or a blur in the background, but as a complete, indisputable and irrevocable presence. Consequently, I called the photographer and the videographer twice. "I'm the man who paid your bill," was how both talks began, and that was all they needed to hear. I only asked for one thing, a different cut of the wedding video, my cut, without shouting or making demands. There were no wide pans that covered my face while Doug played the hero, no images of me sitting by myself in the back, and no edits that gave the impression that I was an outsider in a family-filled room. I requested that they use the money I had paid for to produce something truthful, sincere, and silent. I recorded my toast and forwarded it to them. With clenched teeth and a broken heart, I said, "So, if I'm not the father, I guess I'll just be the bank that believed in her." And I asked that the movie conclude with it fading to black on that line. 3 weeks later, they sent the edited version on a flash drive, enclosed in a protective envelope. I once sat by myself in the living room, with the lights out and the volume turned down, and watched it. My face, my words, my presence, and the lengthy silent pause that followed the last statement like an unanswered question were all real. It wasn't dramatic or resentful. I took a while to send it. Uncertain whether I was trying to punish her or set myself free, I kept it on my desk for nearly a week before mailing it, just the flash drive and a printed photo I discovered hidden in the back of a drawer, without a letter or return address. Sophia and I were laughing like the world had never wronged us in the front yard, both of us smeared with mud. With my hair not yet gray and her front teeth still crooked, she must have been 8 or 9 years old. I assumed she would understand me without my having to say anything if she ever opened the present. I remained silent after that. Didn't answer her calls or the fresh wave of messages that arrived, some of which were angry, some of which were hopeful, and one of which was just her sobbing quietly into the phone while repeating, "I didn't know, I didn't know." As if it were a curse or a hymn. I stopped responding because I did too much to continue attempting to wring love out of a relationship that had been reduced to a cameo, not because I no longer loved her. I had no intention of punishing her. I simply didn't want to try out for the part of father in a life that I had already paid a high price to be a part of. Silence is sometimes a disguised form of mercy, despite the common belief that it is cruel. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to remain silent. I kept what I did a secret from everyone, even the lawyer, Karen, and Doug. Sophia is most likely the only one who was aware of it, and only if she viewed the entire movie. Bridges weren't burned by me. I refrained from punching. I simply gave them the bill and turned to go. And perhaps that's the problem with forgetting. You gain the ability to remember everything, not to use it as a weapon, but to recognize the aspects of yourself that cannot be bought, altered, or replaced. I simply nod and respond, "Yeah, I was there." Because I was there when others asked me about the wedding, including if I went, danced, or cried. Long before there was a cake, music, dress, or guest list, I was there. I was present when she first handled a crayon and sketched a picture of us both grinning under a crooked sun on a hill. She only wanted to know if it would ever alter its mind when I was there and the sky was blue. Even after years have passed, I still don't know the answer, but I do know this. If love without acknowledgement is still considered love, then perhaps some of us lead our daughters down the aisle without ever stepping into the spotlight.